Campside Media.
Hey, Campside listeners, welcome back to Inside the Tent, our show where we go behind the microphone of our favorite podcasts and talk to the people who brought them to life. My name is Jeff Eisenman, and I'm the CEO of Campside Media. Today, I am lucky enough to talk to Campside co-founder Matt Shaer about origin stories, a new weekly show from Campside that has just launched. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and you can watch it on YouTube. You're going to hear a lot more very shortly about Matt and the show. Remember, if you want more exclusive content or behind-the-scenes anecdotes from our shows, make sure to go to joincampside.com to become a free member of the Campside community. Again, that's joincampside.com. Here's my conversation with Matt. So, in order to tell you the origin story of our new show, Origin Stories, I'm going to do a poor approximation of the show's format, and I'll say the word origin a bunch of times. I'll start by telling you that Matt Shaer has an obsession, a mostly healthy obsession, with how stories are made, what inspired them, the setbacks, the successes, the origins. So, let's talk about Matt first, which he doesn't love doing, but he talks about other people on the show. Matt has written about cardboard and loneliness for the New York Times Magazine. That was two separate pieces, just to be clear. He hosted the enormously popular podcast Suspect about a murder at a Halloween party. And in We Came to the Forest, he recently told the story of the first environmental protester killed by police in the United States. Almost done. Matt has EP'd a ton of amazing shows for Campside Media, including Noble, the top podcast of 2024. And much of this is tied to being a co-founder of the podcast studio Campside Media, where I am lucky enough to be his colleague. Finally, Matt is a journalist and author whose enormous gifts of curiosity and empathy make him a natural-born storyteller and a story lover. So it's worth saying that one without the other doesn't quite work. If you're just curious, you come across maybe as an interrogator. And if you're just empathetic, then you won't dig until you find the truth. All right? That's it.
Wow.
What do you think?
Yeah. That's like when I read these introductions in front of people and they just like look like they're full of warmth and happiness. That's how I feel now. You should read all the intros for Origin Stories.
Okay. Matt, right after you've watched or read or listened to something great, you're eager to know how it was made. And so for Origin Stories that led you to Noah Hawley, that led you to Connie Walker, that led you to Patrick Radden Keefe, that led you to folks who work in multiple mediums, whether that's film, TV, magazines, audio, all the different formats that could be relevant. So let's start there. You've worked with Abakar Adan, our senior producer, over the last couple months to get the show ready for launch. How did you choose who to go to first as guests?
It's been an interesting process because, as you know, we started recording this podcast over the summer before, when we were still kind of sorting out the format and what it might sound like. And those early interviews, the ones that I booked myself and that I when I was formulating that initial list, that was all pure, these are people I love and I'm maybe friends with, or at least have their email address, and I can get in touch with them and reach out to them and get them to spend an hour talking about nerdy subjects. So that's true of Patrick, who I've known for a little while. When we started thinking about expanding the show a little bit, because I think that there is a scenario where it becomes a version of people that I know in my life that I'm talking to who are journalists in either audio or print format. We knew we wanted to expand past that and to talk to people from film and TV and from documentaries. So we started working with a great talent booker in Central Talent Booking who helped us arrange some of these guests. And we begged everyone we know to try to get in touch with other guests. I think the commonality for everyone that we speak to, it's kind of twofold. They've had a certain degree of success in their given medium, enough to be able to have something out into the world that they're really proud of, that we can dissect on the show and analyze and understand how it came to be. And then the second is that they're storytellers with a capital S. I think storyteller gets overused way too much. It's almost as bad as creator. But it is true that there are people out there who make a living and who see their true calling as telling a story in whatever format they're ultimately gravitate towards. Or maybe it's multiple formats, as with someone like Patrick or Noah Hawley, who's a novelist and a screenwriter too. So it has to be both of those things. And luckily there's a lot of what's ironic is you know, in doing some of the press ahead of this, the launch of Origin Stories, I've found myself talking about worries that people have about AI and algorithms and TikTok and shortened attention spans. But everyone on the show has found a way to make it work, right? They found a way to tell long, engaging, complicated stories. They found a way to fund them. They found a way to distribute them. They found a way to report them. And that extends all the way from someone like Noah, who gets a lot of money from FX to make his shows, all the way down to someone like Evan Ratliff, who gets a lot of money to write magazine stories. But when he set out to create a podcast about AI, a podcast called Shell Game, he decided he wanted to bootstrap it and raise money on his own in order to have more creative control over it. So that's a long-winded answer, or a long-winded way of saying that there are just a few things that hold all of these people together. And I also don't want to get too precious about who we include or don't include. We're doing, in an upcoming episode, I think I can say this, we're doing the creators of Degrassi High, the long-running TV show, which spawned endless offshoots. And I don't think when I started thinking about origin stories that I would have been like, oh, got to get the Degrassi High people in there. But once you start doing these interviews and hearing from people about their processes, especially processes you don't fully understand, like TV, now I'm like, yeah, well, I am curious about how you get something like that off the ground. So it's been a process. It's been an iterative process, as they say.
Often on the show Origin Stories, you ask about the kernel. So what you've experienced, or where you've had the most experience and the most success, is in long-form podcasts, long-form magazine articles. Now we're working on a weekly show. What was the kernel of the idea here that not only led to the show being made, but got you excited enough to start really working on it?
Yeah, it was twofold. I mean, one has to do with, and I find myself thinking and saying this a lot, that the demise of long form, or the cancellation of long form, which wasn't a cancellation. The guys who had been making that for years decided that they'd been making it for long enough, and they had literally interviewed everybody in the world who they wanted to interview, and they were going to set down their microphones. That was a big part of it for me, because I was, like a lot of journalists, I listened to long form religiously. I considered it to be as good as a textbook, as good as a journalism class, and how people got to where they are, how they think about stories, how they think about reporting. And I knew right away that I was never going to be able to make long form, because it's, number one, very specific voices. It's of an era. They were really good at what they did. But there's this idea that, okay, there's this hole that I feel personally in the market where I want that show to exist, because I really enjoyed listening to it on a weekly basis. And then from there, I started thinking about, okay, how would I not duplicate what's already been done? How would I not remake a show at a lesser quality that's already been done so well? And from there, I started to think a little bit about Song Exploder, a little bit about the Paris Review interviews that I really love. I have all these collections of the Paris Review interviews from, I think they've put out 5 or 6 anthologies, and they break them down into subject, like relationship with editor, or publication, or writer's block, or whatever. It's fascinating how they do it. And in those books are a bunch of people talking about the kernel or backstory to their most famous book. And then on the other hand, you have something like Song Exploder, which did this with songs, right? Took apart a song and said, okay, I need to know exactly how these chord changes were generated, how the lyrics were written. And so when you take all those three polls, long form, the Paris Review interview, something like Song Exploder, I landed on this idea for origin stories that, okay, what if we focused on one particular piece of storytelling and it had less biographical information than long form did. And it was really about this often invisible process from spark to conception to whiteboarding and index carding and all that, which I've gone through a million times myself and find fascinating and a little opaque. I like to hear other people talking about it because it doesn't often get talked about. So I think the last thing I'll say about this and the last part of the creative process or the origin story is that I really didn't want it to be just for other journalists. I really wanted it to be for a wide audience, which is what long form was at the end of its run. Like I've said this to you before, I used to have people come up to me because I was on long form before, like 10 years ago, and people who I never would have expected listened to it, but they were listening to it because they were interested in creativity. They might be ad people, or they might be coders, or they might be, occasional karaoke singers who are interested in, just expressing themselves creatively. And that's what I really, that's the highest hope for origin stories, that at some point it gets to an audience where people don't have to have any grounding in the nuts and bolts of what's being talked about and are there just to understand. And so far it has been like that. People do want to talk about studio notes. I'm thinking here of John Hoffman, who made Only Murders in the Building. He had a long section about studio notes, but it was really about like how you manage feedback and how you stayed true to your creative vision. And I think that's something that anybody can understand or anyone would be drawn to.
There's two things that come to mind. The first you hear me obsess about a lot, and that's format. How to deliver something that each week you have a sense of what you're getting, but it feels quite different. That A block, that B block, that C block, super traditional 3-act structure that you see in movies, TV. How did you go in designing a format, and then how has that format changed as you've made the first 15 or so episodes?
Yeah, it's a really good question because you identified the sort of potentially fatal flaw in this format, which is talking about one particular piece of TV or journalism or whatever. Ideally, you want the person to have seen it, but a lot of people are not going to have seen all of Alien Earth. When we recorded the interview, it wasn't even widely available. I'd only seen a couple of episodes. Or even for a magazine article, a lot of people are not going to have read the whole thing before they sit down. So where we settled was to have a kind of cold open. The way we use the cold open, the first 3 minutes, is to describe the project as quickly and as fully as I'm able. So with Say Nothing, Patrick Keefe's book, just try to sketch the outlines of what the book is about. And then in the bio section, which comes after the theme music, to talk a little bit about the background of the person in the biography, because you also, that I didn't want to spend a lot of time. I didn't want to have the first question be like, how did you get into magazines? I really wanted people to focus right on the piece of work that we were discussing. So that was in it. You hear that in the very early episodes, which changed as I've gotten much better at getting to the point faster. I think I've recorded sometimes really long cold opens where I'm just in there describing what this show is about and all the names of the characters. And I've done the same with bios, and in the moment it feels great, but then I go back and listen and I'm like, no one really cares what I have to say about this. They just want to hear the conversation. So that's been the learning curve for me, the balance between giving people enough information that they're not lost when we're talking about it, but not giving them too much. And I will say that I've been surprised about this with the guests too. Like the guests get it. They don't go into like insane plot summaries themselves because they don't want to spoil it often for the people who are going to watch or going to read. That balance is the part that I've found the most challenging, because once you get into the interview, it's just kind of rolling. Although getting to the point in the interviews faster is something that I've had to get better at, because with my friends or people I know casually or through work, I don't feel guilty keeping them for 2 hours while I wander around, but like someone like Noah Hawley has much better things to do than watch me try to get to the point.
So I think that's exactly what they want to be doing.
Well, you are right that I have been really interested in the reception from potential guests. They're like, yes, I love nerding out about talking about the things that I never get to talk about when I'm on a press junket, which is what is Timothy Oliphant like in real life, as opposed to why does the pilot of Alien Earth start in this scene as opposed to this scene? And you can see people's faces change. They're like, oh, yes, heck yes. So all to say that you're right. We are benefiting immensely with this early run of, frankly, insane guests. We're benefiting from the fact that people do really love talking about this because they're creative people and they rarely get a chance to really get in the weeds about how they work.
Right. It's amazing, actually, to me that you haven't used the word, or maybe you haven't, I missed it, used the word craft a lot, because it can apply to all sorts of different types of projects, and people want to talk about their craft. And the only reason I flag that is it's hard to use the word craft without sounding pretentious. And having listened to a bunch of the episodes already, because I get to do that, the conversations aren't pretentious. The conversations are practical and the passion is there, but it's not hard to relate. And I think that says something about you, how you've interviewed them, and the people you're interviewing.
I think it says a lot more about the people I'm interviewing, but thank you. Yeah, I mean, I was thinking too about, my dream is someday to have a book of all the advice that people give. Let's say we're lucky enough to make 60 episodes. We would basically have, 50 pages of immensely good advice. And I was thinking the same thing about the Patrick Keefe interview, where he does give, it's not airy in the sky, pretentious advice. He's got this amazing piece in there where he's talking about accessibility. He's like, I don't want to be writing for TikTok. I want to have a certain level of professionalism in my writing, and I want to take a certain level of care with it. However, we live in an era where attention is at a premium. People consume things in different ways. So that may mean sparing the 2-paragraph description of a tree in the forest that I happen to walk through, because you've always got to be thinking about where the reader is going to exit, where they're going to just be like, this is too much. So that kind of advice is really good to hear. But I think this also ties back to what I was saying before. I don't think people get to talk about this kind of thing. They might get to do a Q&A about what's on their bookshelf, and they might get to give advice one-on-one to someone who wants it. But they're probably not going to be able to be like, this is what I've found after 10 years of how to organize stuff by index notes, or when to take pictures, or when not to take pictures. It's super interesting.
And obviously you mean no disrespect to TikTok, which is probably listening right now. But it was interesting because I did listen to the Keefe episode, and he talks about how his own brain has changed because of social media in general, and that he gets impatient when he reads, which is fascinating, and that's can't help but impact how he creates.
I would say that's the number one one of the big themes that I've seen over these interviews is people talking about how they're adapting to shifts in attention economy. And that's true of the TV people. That's true of John Hoffman talks about this with the first episode of Only Murders, which literally starts with a flash forward to a SWAT team breaking into the apartment and Selena Gomez is clutching a body. He was so blunt about that, which I found refreshing. He was like, look, you gotta do it. You basically have to do it. We live in a world now where people need to be sucked in right away to the story you're telling. And the magazine people have said that. The book people have said that. The TV people have said that. And I think what I do want to highlight, because I think it's an important distinction, they're not being like, well, we're selling out. We're just going to do the lowest common denominator. They're being like, well, we're just being realistic about where people are right now. Because they often say, I do it myself when I'm turning on a Netflix series. I want to be sucked in right away, or I'm going to change the station. So plus, you just said change the station, which tells us something about your approach and your age and all of that. Yeah. So I want to ask you, can you have a sculptor on Origin Stories? Super good question. Open to it, theoretically. I will say this. The only thing that's really important to me is someone who tells a story at some sort of length, sustains a narrative in a certain way, a poet would be hard to have because we might get at the kernel of inspiration of a single poem. But let's say it's like a series of poems and it's how that got built. Yes. Visual art is something I'm still tossing over in my head. I don't know the answer to it. My wife's a curator and I am really interested in this. My not thoughtful answer is that it sort of strikes me as it comes from a slightly different place, and that yes, someone labors over one piece of art for a long time, but they're not thinking about character development, or they're not thinking about cliffhangers and how it all gets built in. But I reserve the right to totally change my mind. I guess another big question, and I'm curious to hear from listeners about this too, is music, right? Music is a nightmare from trying to get licensing and cleared so we'd be able to play it. That would be a challenge. But like an album is a story, right? Like there are albums that are stories. And obviously, like you think about some of the big albums of the past 20 years, they have incredible backstories of where they were written and recorded. But maybe the final answer is that like right now, I really just want people who are working in a certain kind of storytelling, but I don't know how long that's going to last.
And by the way, a leading question, because I think game designers and sculptors and musicians are telling stories with their work, whether it's one song, one huge sculpture, one small sculpture, or Grand Theft Auto. I genuinely believe that. Is it intimidating to talk to these folks?
No, I would say that Noah Hawley is the closest I've come to being fully terrified because he is such a master storyteller. I mean, that guy is really good. And I do get nervous going in, but this comes back to what we were talking about earlier. People are so clearly relieved not to have to talk about Hollywood or AI or whatever's happening in their industry and be able to like be a nerd for an hour that it very quickly gets comfortable. Like the John Hoffman interview, I can't wait for everyone to see it. Like I was in heaven, he was in heaven. He was like, I get to talk about this for an hour. It was wonderful. So the nerves subside. I'm really nervous right now about launching the show. I'm terrified, but not nervous about individual guests. Yeah.
And by the time whoever's listening to this hears it, the show will have launched, which is amazing. And you said something really interesting. Maybe it was a slip, Matt. You said when people see it, you talked about the Hoffman interview, when people see it, and that's because there's a video element to some of the episodes and not just an audio element. Did that scare you?
Yeah, no one wants to look at me ever. Like, there's a reason I got into magazine journalism and podcasting. It's so I would not have to look at myself and other people wouldn't either. However, this is what I will say about the upside. I've been watching these cut downs or edits of the videos, as you know, that we're going to be posting of the interviews. And like, it's cool. Like a lot gets spoken with how they react and formulate their thoughts. It's like you can tell when they're really thinking about something. You can tell when they're smiling a little and it's a little bit more of a joke.
Last question. One fun thing. Tell me something in an interview, something unexpected, something funny. Did you ask someone about not the project you were supposed to ask about because you were just so damn curious?
As people may or may not know, the Selena Gomez character in Only Murders in the Building is named Mabel, which happens to be my 10-year-old daughter's name. So at the end of the John Hoffman interview, it doesn't work on audio, but it will be available in video. I was like, John, wait right here. Wait right here. He was like, what's happening? And then I brought Mabel in and I was like, tell John your name. And like, he was over the moon because he like didn't know that people are named Mabel anymore. He's like, I love old lady names. It's amazing. She had no idea who this gentleman was and was just staring at him like he had 16 heads. And it was just a beautiful, awkward shared moment. But you'll have to watch the video of the Hoffman interview to get it.
Did you get Mabel to sign a release?
I know. I was just wondering about that. Like, should I put my daughter's face on video? But it's too late now. I gave the okay.
Matt, thanks for doing this. I cannot wait to listen to a dozen more episodes. The show is going to be a hit, as are the rest of the Campside Weeklies coming soon.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks so much to Matt and the rest of the Origin Stories team, and thank you for listening to Inside the Tent. If you haven't already, don't forget to go to joincampside.com to become a free member of the Campside community. That's joincampside.com.